This episode is brought to you by my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Learn fertility awareness from the comfort of your own home at your own pace for a fraction of the cost. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats on Amazon.com. Listen to The Fifth Vital Sign for free when you sign up for a 30-day trial with Audible. Visit fertilityfriday.com/audible for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/audible. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 270. Welcome to the 270th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I have a great interview for you today. In today's episode, I'm sharing my interview with Laura Brunner, and we dive deep into her personal experience with hypothalamic amenorrhea. And this is a topic that I've covered in a few different episodes, and I've had episodes with Nicola Rinaldi, author of No Period, Now What. If you have struggled with issues of hypothalamic amenorrhea, I highly recommend her book. It is an incredible resource for women who are dealing with hypothalamic amenorrhea. It combines the science with women's personal experiences and really shares what actually works to bring periods back, although it's often not what you want to hear when you're in that situation, because it typically involves eating more and exercising less. And so in today's episode, Laura shares her experience where she stopped having withdrawal bleeds while she was still on the pill. And then when she ultimately came off the pill, it took 5 years before her period came back. And so Laura shares with us what that experience was like for her and what she ultimately did to bring her period back and conceive when she was ready to start a family. So really powerful story. And for those of you who've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll appreciate how much I love the opportunity to share women's stories, real women's stories on the podcast. You know, of course, I also love interviewing experts in the field, but I like having a combination of both because I think it's really important to have a place to share what our stories are and what these experiences not only are like from a scientific perspective to increase our understanding, but from an emotional perspective. Like, what does it actually look like when you're going through something like this, where you come off the pill and your period doesn't return and you are forced then to really figure out what's happening and how to restore your normal hormone cycle. These are the issues that I support women with in my programs, whether it be my live coaching programs or even in my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program, ultimately connecting you back with your menstrual cycle and not only understanding fertility awareness and the ability to identify which days of your cycle are fertile and which days are not fertile, but also to appreciate your menstrual cycle as the vital sign that it is and to really see that connection between your cycles and your health. I think with hypothalamic amenorrhea, it's a very clear and obvious example. I mean, if you're not ovulating at all, it means you're not producing sufficient amounts of your main ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and essentially it means that you're not operating at the optimal capacity. It's a sign of an underlying issue. Something is actually wrong, and that is why your period isn't showing up when you are a woman of reproductive age. If you're at the stage where you are ready and wanting to dive deeper into fertility awareness, you're wanting to discover the connection between your cycles and your overall health, whether you're looking to use fertility awareness for birth control or whether you're currently trying to get pregnant or planning to get pregnant in the near future, I've cultivated a number of resources for you for information about how you can work with me one-on-one in one of my programs, whether it's my one-on-one coaching program or my group coaching program. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/work with me for details. My book, The Fifth Vital Sign, Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility, contains over 1,000 scientific references. My goal with that book was to create a resource for you if you're wanting to delve deeper into the fertility awareness method, into the female hormone cycle, into how fertility awareness can be used if you're wanting to avoid pregnancy without hormonal birth control, if you're wanting to optimize your chances of conception, and or if you're wanting to understand the connection between your cycles and your health. The Fifth Vital Sign is available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook formats. And if you want to delve even deeper into fertility awareness, you're welcome to join my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. Now, this program is the most comprehensive fertility awareness self-study program available. You can learn at your own pace in your own living room for a fraction of the cost of joining one of my live coaching programs. So head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. Now let's jump into today's episode with Laura Bruner. And I'm excited to be here today with Laura Bruner. Laura is a certified nutrition consultant, certified CrossFit trainer, and mama to Evie Wilder, and a firm believer in the mind-body-soul connection. She's one of the voices and hearts behind the Modern Mamas podcast and has a passion for supporting families, especially moms, at every phase. Laura's goal is to educate and inspire towards intuitive shifts in daily habits and headspace, leading to healthier minds and bodies, increased strength and physical potential, longevity, and most importantly, the empowerment that comes with taking your health into your own hands. Laura has a new online course that she'll be telling us a little bit about. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the connection, the mind-body connection to fertility, and the importance of getting in tune with your intuition. And so without further ado, welcome to the show, Laura.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. It's fun because last time we were in switch roles and now I get to come on your podcast and I'm just giddy about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you're here. I always think I'm sure you found this as well, but whenever you have the opportunity to interview somebody, you really get to know them in a different way. Because, you get to ask all these questions and kind of find out more about what they do. So it's really neat that we were able to have that experience on both sides.
Yes, I love it. And it's been really fun getting to know you. And I'm so inspired by your work and I'm so grateful for it because there's so many women who need to hear this from someone like you who's been through it and all that. So just thanks for all that you do.
Well, and before we get into all of the topics of the day, and I think this is actually the topic of the day, but I'd love to hear about what was your inspiration behind the Modern Mamas podcast. And so essentially what inspired you to start putting out this information? I know you mentioned that you had your own journey with infertility, so maybe we can go a little bit into that. And then also what inspired you to create your new Intuitively You program?
Yeah, gosh. When I was 1 month old, I'm just kidding. So it the story starts back in college, really, kind of in high school, just in terms of having a bit of a disordered relationship with fitness and food, a very controlling relationship, one where I kind of lived my life around these things. I had to work out for an hour plus every day. I had to eat specific things at specific times. And my life as a whole suffered from it. And I kind of went through ebbs and flows, but, going into college and high school was like, I wanted to be the captain of my field hockey team. So I was just so focused on that and that identity that I ran because that's what my coaches really cared about. Made that captain spot, but my body suffered and then kind of got back on track. And then in college, walked on to the cross country team and again, just kind of like built my identity around fitness and then moved into endurance training like triathlons and half marathons and marathons. And I used my identity as an athlete as kind of a disguise to hide really just as a disordered relationship with food, fitness, and my own body and my own self as a way to kind of like daily, in a way, punish myself. And so then onward from there, college, I had been on birth control also since I was 15. I had just a few periods and they were a little bit irregular and I had some bad cramping. So Band-Aid, got put on birth control. And that was like, I guess fine. pretty regular periods. They would disappear for stretches while I trained really hard and then kind of come back. And then in college, I went on Lowestrin, which is, I guess, a super low dose birth control or something. And it went away altogether at the same time training for triathlons. Overtraining, I should specify. I was overtraining for triathlons. I'd go on, I remember Sundays would be like our long run days. I was training with a team and we would go, I might have run like anywhere from 10 to 13 miles. And then I would go to the gym and do some dumbbell work and sometimes also get on the elliptical to wrap it up. So
wow,
overtraining, intense. And I was just in this vicious cycle of feeling like that's what I had to do, and, to earn my food and to fit this identity and to look a certain way. And it just wasn't great. And then my period went away and it stayed away. And I went off birth control because I was switching, graduated college, met the man of my dreams, started teaching again, waking up early in the morning, going and working out for 2 hours, teaching all day, then coaching field hockey, sometimes running with my athletes, prepping my classroom, going to bed, just high stress, very controlled, very A-type, never taking a pause to listen to myself, my body, my mind, my heart, just not practicing mindfulness, just go, 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 because that's all I knew. And that's how I knew to control. And then went off birth control when I switched jobs because of insurance, and my period never came back. And then a year went by and another year and another year. And then come to 4 years, 5 years. And I was like, well, this isn't normal. And my husband and I, who, boyfriend turned husband, decided we wanted to, we at least wanted to have the conversation about a family. And I didn't know what to do. I had no period. And I knew that that was a problem. And so something had to change. And in the mix of all that, I also injured my neck and ended up just living in chronic pain. And I look back now to that time and I'm like, well, I would never change it because so it was probably just, it was a compounding. It wasn't like a single event where I hurt my neck and it was like, oh no, it was just kind of this pain that came out of seemingly nowhere that would always be exacerbated when I was super stressed. And in that stage of my life, I was pretty much chronically super stressed. And it seemed, I just poured money into chiropractors and acupuncturists and craniosacral. And I even went and saw a regular surgeon and was like, just fix me. And they're like, well, there's nothing wrong enough to even consider surgery. No one could tell me why I was in pain. And then finally I was like, well, I'm feeling very hopeless. And I still to this day cannot remember the exact moment where I made this decision, but I decided to reach out to a therapist to kind of just help me work through the potential that I might be in pain forever. And I found a mindfulness-based therapist, and she was absolutely incredible. And so started that journey in therapy, and through speaking with her and practicing mindfulness, and finally, for the first time, since probably I was a little kid, pausing, meditating, listening to myself, tuning into my body, tuning into my heart. My husband and I made the decision to leave California and move up to Washington, to a very small town where I trained way less, where I kind of fell back in love with food and where it comes from and the flavors and the process of cooking and, not worrying about quantities, just eating. And I slowly started to get in tune with my body. And I spent hours every day outside in the trees. I actually was climbing trees and hiking and just falling back in love with my surroundings. And in the same time, practicing mindfulness while I was outside and while I was eating and while I was just living, finding a way to be mindful throughout my daily life and checking back in with my therapist on a monthly basis. And lo and behold, after about 7 months up there, period came back. And then 10 months later, we didn't try. I wanted to have a solid half a year plus to let my body reset and really find the rhythm and have multiple cycles. And then, so period came back in October, and we conceived our daughter the following September, after just a couple months of trying. And I wholeheartedly believe that that's because of and also in that time, even prior to my period coming back, my pain went away entirely. And so I credit so much of that to mindfulness and reconnecting with my body's wisdom and my body's ability to be well, and my body's ability to know how much to train and when to train and how to train and when to eat and all of that. And so it's kind of come full circle. And now I have this incredible baby girl who's going to be 2 in June, which is crazy. And I get to come to motherhood now with these tools as well, to be into with my body and hopefully show her that and teach her that she doesn't have to be at odds with herself, because I believe we live in a society where young girls especially are kind of taught that they're not quite good enough. They should be smaller. They need to look a certain way. There's all these expectations where ultimately she is perfect the way she is, as am I. And so I've just kind of found this new sense of self-love that I never could have imagined. And it's been, I wouldn't change a thing because it's brought me to my work. And then also more importantly to motherhood, with this headspace of the fact that I am worthy. And, it's been a journey, but I wouldn't change a thing. I'm very, very happy now and continuing to grow and learn and still go to therapy, because I feel like that's something that it can last, it should potentially last a lifetime. I love that support. And so there's a pretty long-winded response.
No, that's amazing. I mean, you had such a long, and I don't know if arduous is the word, journey. And I want to unpack some of it, because you mentioned that you were really active. I think that was a theme throughout basically your teens and your 20s, right? Like you were an athlete for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
And
that was my identity very much.
Yeah, exactly. You took the word out of my mouth.
Yeah.
But you mentioned also, so kind of like, so you're, the athlete part is part of your identity, but you also mentioned how, the body image aspect of it, like what you thought the body is supposed to look like and all that. So I'm just curious, looking back or just remembering the way that you were thinking during that time, how important was it for you to look a certain way, and describe for us? I mean, when you look back at it, like, to try to make my question make sense, I think every woman who's listening to this podcast and every woman who lives in the world is well aware of what what the television tells us is beautiful. And she's always skinny. She's often always, white. As a woman of color, I can say that, because just type in beautiful woman on Google. I rest my case.
Absolutely.
But there's a very specific ideal of beauty. Did that affect? So I kind of just want to get a sense from you about the body image aspect of your journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a kind of a combination of a few things. I think, again, something that I've had to work through and unpack a lot is identifying with, like, having this, let go of it at this point, but having a need to have an identity, kind of, I think. And so part of it stems back to the fact that I was always very, very, very small when I was little. So like from the time I was born until about sophomore year of high school, I had nicknames like Mini Me. I remember them singing a song when I played softball, like, she may be small, but she can hit the ball. She's got Pee Wee Power. I was just always like I was tiny. And then all of a sudden, sophomore year of high school, I got my period and I grew like 6 inches, and I started to kind of turn into a woman, where I'd always been a little bit more just like small, and no curve, just tiny. And I think that I kind of identified with that. And so I think a part of what happened for me was about the same time that I got my period and I started turning into more of a woman. I wanted to stop that in a way. And I never would have known this at the time, but I think a part of me just identified with being this like smaller female. I could wear anything, didn't really have to wear a bra. I was just tiny, and I that's all I knew. And I think back now to my childhood, and meaning no harm, obviously, my parents started it with like Mini Moochka, and I just had I was mini. Everything was just, all my nicknames had to do with my size. And there was always a comment on my size. And so I identified with my size being small, and I didn't want that to change. And so I think the excessive exercise was in part, it started kind of, I think, because I wanted to be captain of my field hockey team, and that meant a lot to me. And then I realized that I could also very much control the size of my body with how much I exercise and how much I controlled diet. And to the outside viewer, I was eating probably potentially enough calories for someone who was not super active, but I was exercising so much, eating very low fat, and controlling my size through what I ate and how I moved. And then to kind of compound that, I had two friends who were, well, especially one of my friends in high school was like, this kind of inspiration to me. She was Greek, and she was beautiful, and she was tan, and she had just the flattest tummy. And she always kind of talked down about herself. And so I looked at her and I was like, man, and she got so much attention, and she was beautiful. And so was I, but I saw her, we just looked so different. And so somehow in my mind, I wanted that tummy. because society again says that flat belly, the 6-pack abs, the curves, like the tiny tummy and the bigger bum, which is beautiful. It's just not my body. And I was trying to change my body. I was like, well, the only way I can have a 6-pack is if I am far too lean for my body. And so I had to work and work and work and run and run and run. And then, it just was this, again, that coming back to this, what I saw on TV, what I saw among some of my friends, what I saw, who was getting attention, all of that. And I just kind of held on to that. And so, I unpacking, like I look back and I'm like, man, I just did not love myself in a way that I wish that I could go back and tell her that I don't have to meet anyone else's expectations for what I look like. And
well, can I ask you a question? Something's coming to mind. So did anyone in your life ever call you out on all of that exercise and not eating enough?
So here's another thing that I struggle with. So it was always like in a passive way. Like that meaning well, my friends in high school went to my school counselor, who was like a 60-year-old man he called me in to talk about it and had no idea.
Wow. Your friends went to the school counselor on your behalf because they were concerned about you? That's huge because we're talking teenagers in high school.
Exactly. So I was not well. And then my mom took me to the pediatrician so the pediatrician could tell me, versus sitting down and being like, hey, let's talk through this. Like as someone who's close to me. And obviously I'm grateful for all of it. Like people worrying about me means a ton, but I think what I desperately needed was someone to sit down and look me in the eye and talk to me not about my size, not about necessarily about the food and the exercise, but like, hey, how are you? You know what I mean? Just kind of diving a little bit more on an emotional level. And I didn't know at the time that I needed that. And I guarantee I still would have pushed back a little bit, but I wanted people potentially, I look at it now and I'm like, let's say my daughter were to start to struggle with this a little bit. The conversation, I think it's very important that it's not about the food and the exercise, because those are the one thing in my life that I was controlling. Don't you dare take those away. Instead, let's dive into why do you need to control those things? What is it about those? You know what I mean? And so, but my 15, 16-year-old friends wouldn't have necessarily the capacity to have that conversation. And my mom didn't at the time either. And so people, they try to help. And and that's where I look back at my life and I'm like, I don't regret any of that. I feel for that girl, but I turned out the way that I am now, and I'm happy. And I've learned so much that hopefully I can spread the word a little bit and work with moms and, raise a daughter. When I found out I was having a girl, I don't even have the words to express how important that was to me and how special, because I know I will mess up at times. That's why
we all do.
The one thing exactly, but there's also
beside the words mess up in the dictionary has to be parents.
Totally. There is no perfection. We just do the best we can with what we know. And I feel like I have this whole arsenal of tools and knowledge from my own experience that I can hopefully use when we speak. And my husband and I never talk about her size. We don't talk about bodies, and except for maybe like, oh, look, what they're capable of and their strengths. And if we talk about beauty, it's not just the physicality. And so she'll never have a nickname because of the way that she looks or, any of that. And I don't want to, be too anal about it. And obviously she'll experience those kinds of things. But I guess the most important thing I can do is just open the door of conversation. Like no topic is off limits. You can talk to me about anything, and hopefully, opening those doors and just making sure there's open lines of communication and feeling is great, and just helping her stay in tune with her body and her mindfulness practice. We already, if she's really worked up, I always say, maybe take one breath, and she'll go, and if I take one more, and she takes another breath. And then, and I never want to stop her from feeling, but just like taking a breath to kind of allow her to like down regulate her whole system and kind of tune in a little bit. So just kind of giving her tools and, showing through my own example.
Well, I think, there's so much of what you said that's so important. I'm thinking of the listener. I mean, I'm sure there's some moms listening to the show wondering what they could have done, or what they could do, for example, if their daughter was going through something like this. And part of my question around, like, did anyone ever try to talk to you about it? When you were talking about their approaches and the approach that you feel would have been more effective, there was definitely part of me that was like, well, could anyone have told you anything? Because I remember being 15 and no one could tell me anything. I knew everything. So I really appreciate your reflections on it. I feel like it gives us a more tangible, specific way of what that girl did need back then, whether or not you would have been open or receptive to it. But that's what you said was not what you needed was people not to focus on the action, not to focus on the food, not to focus on the exercise, but to focus on like me and how I'm feeling and why I'm doing this. And I think, it's just because we're talking about hypothalamic amenorrhea here. So we haven't named it, but we're talking about basically what happens when you're not giving your body enough energy, when you're exercising. I mean, you can sustain a high degree of exercise, but you need to consume a high degree of calories to offset the expenditure. So we're talking about a really common issue here. And when you were put on the pill, was it just because, or was it specifically related to your periods as a result of the exercise and the food stuff?
No, I was put on the pill prior to, but when I was on the pill, I hated running. I tried to get out of like conditioning at basketball practice. So at that point, there was no over exercising or, as far as I remember, any disordered relationship with food. I was definitely just eating like standard American diet. And it was just kind of like a late bloomer. I didn't get my period till I was 15. And so it was just because they were irregular. But then I think back and I'm like, man, my body had just started to cycle. And then you expect it to be regular in 3 months. So it just it makes me so mad. I think I don't remember the exact details, but I just knew that it was irregular. And then I remember having like debilitating cramping, but there was no lifestyle recommendations. There was no, hey, maybe, and I look back now, I'm like, man, I'm super gluten intolerant. I was eating a lot of gluten, like all the things that I probably could have just shifted to try and normalize that cycle a little bit and try to reduce the cramping. But instead it was like, okay, a couple months of bad cramping and irregularity. Let's pop the pill on as a Band-Aid. And I still remember so vividly being like, trying to like mess with my mom because she was so adamant that I called it hormones instead of birth control.
Interesting.
And so I would like purposely tell people I was on birth control just to mess with her a little bit, all in jest. But yeah, so it's just like, at that age, I was put on it just because of a few irregular cycles. And so I don't know. That in of itself is probably an entire podcast topic that I'm assuming you've covered.
Well, what's interesting about your story is that, so the pill predated essentially the period stopping. But in your case, because you were on the pill, then, the fact that, so if you weren't on the pill, at some point you probably would have lost your period, and probably, I'm using that word very loosely. It sounds as though if you weren't on the pill, you would have lost your period. But the pill then would have allowed you to kind of not really, perceive the extent of what was happening. One of the things that you mentioned that I do want to just briefly touch on is that when you were ready to start your family and you decided to come off the pill, or just in general, I don't remember if you came off the pill exactly when you were ready to start a family, but at some point you came off the pill, but you mentioned that it was, did you say 5 years until your periods returned?
Yeah, so I was while on, my period actually went away, while on the pill. And that was about 2 years on the pill, no period. And
so you were taking the pill, but were you like taking, so you would take the pill for whatever, 21 days or whatever, and then take the sugar pills, and the period, you wouldn't get a period during your sugar pills?
Yeah. And I asked the doctor, and because they had switched me to Lowestrin, which I guess it's relatively common with that specific pill to have your period go away. So they looked at me clearly very like tiny, I was very obviously like a runner. I got that question all the time. Are you a runner, or are you gymnast, or whatever? Are you dancer? And they were just like, yeah, normal. You're fine. So then I went off the pill 2 years later, and it didn't come back for another 5. So I was off the pill because I went off it because I ran out of insurance. I had like an insurance gap. And so I went off it, and then it didn't come back. And then when I got insurance again, I was like, well, I'm not going to go back on the pill. I need to sort this out. And that was a long journey to sort it out.
So tell me, so it's kind of like last question along this lines, because I know we're going to talk more about the fertility challenge, but I'm trying to get my head around it. So 5 years with no period. What were you thinking about during this time? I mean, as you know, as a podcaster, when you're interviewing somebody, we can go through 20 years in 5 minutes. It's like, and then, this happened.
Yeah.
But this is 5 years. So what was going through your mind? Were you concerned? Were you worried? Did it become normal? Like, were you actively doing things during that time to try to bring it back? Like, tell us about those 5 years.
I wasn't actively trying to do anything really until the final two. The first three off the pill, I had switched from endurance training to CrossFit, which I fully believe in the methodology of it if done right. But I was taking the mindset from endurance training to CrossFit and basically training for like 2+ hours a day. Now with weights and much higher intensity and all of that. And I switched from, I did not mention that I was also a vegetarian when it went away. And then I switched to a more paleo diet. But instead of just doing paleo, which my body definitely needed meat and way more fat and all of that. But instead of just doing paleo, which probably would have been very beneficial on its own, I did zone. So I was weighing and measuring, which based on everything I've shared is clearly not a great fit for what I needed. What I probably needed in that time was to eat way more than I thought.
Can you just briefly describe what that is, zone? Because I don't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So paleo, I think most people know, it's like just focusing on a real food diet, removing processed foods, grains, processed dairy, all that. Zone is it's a specific diet that was created for people who were like prone to heart disease. And it's great for performance. It's great for weight loss and health if needed. And ultimately what it is, it's a way to, you weigh and measure your food and you eat a certain amount every day, but you also are specific with each meal. So balancing the protein, carbohydrate, and fat with each meal into blocks. And so the beauty of that is that by eating protein, carbs, and fat all at once in a meal, you're balancing insulin levels throughout the day. Where if you were just to eat a high carbohydrate meal, it would spike insulin and then crash. So the premise there is ensuring that you eat a certain amount throughout the day, but then also at each meal, you balance that meal with protein, carbs, and fat in equal quantities. And so
but it sounds like the issue that you weren't eating enough in general.
Oh yeah, I should have been. So it's a block system. And I think I put myself on like a 12 block day. I probably at that time shouldn't have been weighing and measure anything, but if I was to, I probably needed to be closer to 20 just for the fitness I was doing. And then also I had years of rebuilding stores that needed to be done. I've been, very controlling on what I ate for years and not eating enough fat. My body was so deficient in so many things. And so what I wish, and looking back, obviously can't change a thing, but it would have been great if I had gone into eating a more Paleolithic diet and focusing on eating all the things that my body wanted and craved. And I remember like doubling fat, and all I wanted was fat all the time. And so now I've learned to eat the way that my body wants to eat. And so most of the time I eat almost zero sugar, very high fat, a little bit lower carbohydrate. And then I have other spans. I'll have a week where I'm like, I'm just craving more starchy, and I'll eat like sourdough and maybe a little bit more extra fruit and all that. And so learn to kind of tune in. But in that time, making that transition, those first 2 years, I just took the vegetarian endurance athlete and kind of took a similar mindset, but just started eating more meat and cutting out, becoming a little bit orthorexic potentially in terms of like no grains, not, really cutting everything out, being so strict with my diet, and then training way too much. And I think that stress load, the impact on my adrenals, the moving into, lifting weights at that high intensity for that long of a period of time, my body just kind of broke. And that's when I started feeling the pain. And it was during the time when I was in chronic pain that the period thing was in the back of my mind, but it wasn't at the forefront because all I could think about was getting out of that chronic pain and not waking up in the morning and having my jaw, suboccipitals, neck, upper back, everything just like ache and be so stiff and stuck. And I couldn't focus. And then when I started going to therapy and working through a lot of that, I realized that these two things went hand in hand. That's when I started to realize that. And I couldn't and then so, I went through I started thinking about my period, and I was like, great, I'm just going to like pan-sear liver, and I'm going to do super hardcore Western A price, and I'm going to eat all the really nutrient dense foods and take all the supplements. And it still didn't come back because while doing that, I was still at odds with my body. I was still in a place where I was fighting what I perceived as a very broken body. Instead, what my body needed was for me to love it unconditionally and to listen to its wisdom and to realize that I had all I needed to be well. I just needed to support myself. and love myself a little bit more and stop trying to fix myself or change myself or whatever it is. And so that realization didn't really come till maybe like just before we moved to Washington, in those last like year and a half of my journey to fertility, was realizing that I couldn't just paleo really hard and cut back on exercise. It had to be a trifecta, which is not just cut back on exercise, but move my body daily in a restorative way, in a way that felt good, whatever, depending on how I woke up that morning, what I was feeling, which was sometimes CrossFit, sometimes climbing trees, sometimes going for a long walk, sometimes just like restorative flow. And then for the food stuff, falling back in love with food. And when I ate food, eating it from a place of self-love. So I'm eating this food because it tastes great. I enjoyed making it. It came from a place that I love. The flavors are incredible. And eating to serve myself, whether it was emotional or physical or all of those things at once. And then finally, the mindset piece, practicing mindfulness, kind of falling back in love with my body and trusting my body to heal and not trying to change it, just embracing where it was in this journey. And then periods back. And I had a really, really incredible pregnancy and postpartum experience. And so I'm just, again, grateful for all I went through, but it was a journey.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you're talking, so if I think about essentially your experience from age 15 kind of on into adulthood when we were talking in the pre-chat before we hit record for the podcast, one of the things that we were talking about was just that concept of following your intuition, paying attention to your body and all the messages it's sending you. And, it's so interesting because, as one of the central messages that I've been putting out all these years is that the menstrual cycle is a sign of health. And it's a way for us to stay tuned to our bodies. Because if we have that understanding that the menstrual cycle is a sign of health and that a period with ovulation is important and it means that we're healthy, then to think about your experience all these years. So, from when you got your first period, you were disconnected to it, or disconnected from it, I should say, chemically right off the bat, given birth control pills. And over the years then, even when you came off the pill and you didn't get your period, to me, it feels like a reflection of our culture. Like we just don't really teach women that the menstrual cycle is an important sign of health. And a lot of women discover it when they're ready to start having babies because, you can't really have a baby naturally unless you have a period. But so tell us just a little bit about how, like, the role of connecting to your intuition. Like when I hear everything that you're talking about, I just think to myself, was she tired? Like, were you feeling well? Like, were you okay? It sounds like you were really pushing your body to the limit, like day after day after day. And I don't know if you were getting rest and whatever, but looking back, knowing what you know now about, tuning into your body and paying attention to what it needs and nourishing your body and all those things. Like when you think back, like I'm trying to think of how to phrase the question. I could say, how would you, if you could talk to yourself back then, what would you say? Or for a woman who is in her own journey of that, so she's in some level of that, whether it's the exercise or what would you want her to know to help her to kind of tune into what it is her body really needs?
Yeah, it's like in one word, it's kind of just worthiness. Like for whatever reason, I felt like I wasn't worthy of pausing and breathing and just loving myself. Instead, it was a constant need to change myself. And the thing that kills me is we are born loving ourselves and knowing our worthiness. And then somewhere along the lines, we lose it. So I'm like, where could I have gone all the way back? Probably 8th grade. Like junior high was fine for me. I know that's a really hard time for a lot of girls, but maybe because I wasn't hormonal yet, like I didn't have a period yet, none of that. So maybe just before I started to cycle. And this is where I think I love that you talk about the period as a fifth vital sign, because it's so incredibly powerful. And that time of life when we are getting our period for the first time, what if we taught our daughters that now she has this power, like this superpower, versus now, oh gosh, you got your period, here's a pad, and it kind of sucks. You should probably be embarrassed about it, and you're going to have all these symptoms. And so I wonder if that was kind of like this crux where if we could kind of hone in on that time of a woman's life and be like, hey, this is actually something that's incredibly powerful. It's such a cool tool. It's such a cool way for you to connect and love your body and to know what your body's going through. Because, let's say you're pushing at work or in fitness or in life or all of them. And all of a sudden you've got a month where your period's just off. That should be, instead of being like something that we just ignore and like, whatever, that should be a red flag, as I know you talk about. And so maybe that's the time in my life where if I could go back, I would just tell myself, like, this is an incredible tool. This is your magic power. This is your way of really tuning into your body, because that is, I think, the thing that's missing is living a little bit more intuitively and being in tune with ourselves and trusting our bodies. So maybe that's the period where so many women could, if we could go back and kind of shift the headspace just around our period alone, that might also change the dialogue around our bodies and change the dialogue around fitness and nutrition and living day to day and being more in tune versus trying to seek some magic pill or magic diet or magic fitness program that's going to help us change ourselves. And instead, why don't we just maybe embrace ourselves a little bit more?
Mm-hmm. Well, when you were sharing your story, you shared something that struck me, because I can remember feeling a similar way. So I didn't have the same experience at all as you did. But when you talked about how, as a young woman, as a young girl, you were, small, and that was part of your identity, and your nicknames and everything was around you being small. And when your hormones kicked in before your period started or around that time, I mean, as a young woman, that's literally what happens. Our hormones start surging, and then all of a sudden we start depositing weight in different areas that we didn't have it before. And so when you talked about how there was a part of you that wanted to kind of stop that process, I can still remember being a teenager. I don't know exactly how old, but around that age, say 12-ish, 13-ish. And my body all of a sudden changed. Like all of a sudden I would be sitting down and look down and my thighs were bigger. And I remember being not okay with that. And thinking it was a problem. And so when you said that, I kind of had that memory. I still, like clear as day, I was sitting in the gymnasium in my shorts for, gym class. And I looked down and my thighs were big, whereas before they were just like little poles. And they were not big, to be clear. I was 12. And I've always been fairly slender. So this, like, legitimately, it's like you're just seeing a change in your body shifting, because, women, we carry weight in different areas. But when you talked about how we could just be educated about our menstrual cycle, and for, even for it to be like, it's your superpower, all these amazing things happen and whatever, even just to have that discussion of how your body changes and how it's a good thing. But at the same time, we really set our girls up for this problem. If you look on any magazine, they airbrush the thighs, like there's that's a whole thigh gap conversation. And it's like all these natural parts of being a woman were set up to have a problem with it. Anyways, I don't know if there's a question there. It's more of just a commentary, because it really struck me when you said that, because I could resonate with that. And I remember as a young woman too, never been skinnier in my life, never will be that skinny again, and actually thinking that I needed to do crunchies to like flatten my abs.
Mm-hmm. And that was it for me. That was my spot, was my middle. Like once I started getting more hormones and all that, like all of a sudden I could grab a little bit on the belly. And I had always been, like I said, so tiny, and I didn't have curves. I didn't have anything to grab. But then I started turning into a woman, and then there's a beautiful thing about like the fact that our bodies are going to carry fat in places that they need to be fertile and to be well. And somewhere along the line, we feel like we can't have anything to grab. And that's the grabbing's fun. And so just like, I don't know, I wanted to stop that. So like for you, it was your thighs. For me, it was my belly. I thought that I had to have like where if I slap my stomach, it would like, make my hand hurt, just rock. And that's just not my body. And that is okay. And in fact, it's beautiful. You know what I mean? It's not like coming to terms with what I look like. It's or what my body wants to be for health. It's embracing it and learning to really love it and kind of cherish it. And now I look at my belly, and I grew my daughter, and I carried her for 9 months, and then I delivered her, and then I've been nursing her for almost 2 years. And my body is magic. And so, motherhood's been huge for me also, and just body, not just body acceptance, but body really truly loving my body for not just what it looks like, but I do see it in a new light and a new beauty, but then also for what it's capable of. And I'm kind of, in my day-to-day life and in my social media and all of it, like I'm just done talking about bodies. I just am so ready to stop talking about the physicality unless it's, I love talking about what our bodies are capable of and lifting things and in motherhood and chasing our kids around and being capable and feeling good in our skin. But I'm just kind of sick of like the tummy conversation and the stretch marks. And I'm just like, what if we just shifted the focus a little bit and talk less about what we look like and how our bodies have changed from pregnancy, and a little bit more into what we can do mentally, physically, emotionally, how we connect with people on an emotional level and an intellectual level. And just, I'm excited to be shifting that conversation a little bit, and at least in my own world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I
got a lot of the postpartum. Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying that postpartum period, I got a lot of like, wow, you look great or whatever it is. And it's funny because those comments always rub me the wrong way. So I'd always just respond with like, oh yeah, I feel really good every single time. Yeah. Or I'm doing well or whatever, because and it's whether the comments are good or bad or whatever, postpartum, prenatally, pregnancy, I think the best thing we can do for women in general, and whether they're in the motherhood transition or not, just period, is comment less on the way we look. Good, bad, doesn't matter. Because you don't know, you might tell a woman that she looks great. Man, what are you doing? You look great. And meanwhile, she is over exercising, under eating, beating herself up, counting everything she eats, and feeling on the inside pretty bad. But then you tell her, oh, you look great. And she's like, well, I'm doing something right, so I'm going to keep living this way. And that's where it's like, those types of comments, I feel like they don't need to be on the table as often. They don't need to be the focus all the time. And people mean well, right? But oh man, sometimes it can do a lot more than we realize when we comment on the body all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a complicated conversation because as women, we're also on our own journeys and we're somewhere on the spectrum. And even if we know intellectually that we're more than just our bodies and it's not just about how we look, we all still want to look good and we all have our own different ideas of what that means. And we do live in this world. It's not like we live on another planet. So we live in this one where you can barely turn on the television or look on a billboard or open a magazine and see any woman who is over a size 4. And so it's not easy. It's like a battlefield. It's like a war zone out there.
Totally. Oh my gosh.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why I love taking it all back to the menstrual cycle, because I feel like the menstrual cycle is a great equalizer. I mean, you can fool everybody else, but show me your charts.
Right.
Because you can't,
totally.
You can't actually lie to your physical body in the sense that, like, if you are not eating enough, if you are exercising too much, if you're, eventually it's going to show up in your cycles. And so to kind of bring it back there, in your, so there were a lot of specific things, many of which you've spoken about, that really shifted your body in the sense and really brought your period back. So, in your experience then, we talked about this a little bit, but I think just to kind of bring it back to that part of it, what were the things that you felt made the biggest difference when your period finally did return? Like you mentioned basically your experience with therapy, and it sounds as though what you really started doing was addressing the emotional aspect of it, addressing the stress, and tuning into your intuition. But in your own words, what was the kind of like the biggest rocks, the biggest pieces that for you really did contribute to bringing your period back?
I think a lot of it can really come back to mindset, because the way that I approached fitness and nutrition, the major shift, because I had gone to the point where I was eating tons of red meat and not counting anything and just really trying to heal myself with food. Definitely not under eating at that point at all, but it still wasn't back. And I think the shift had to come with the food stuff. Yes, eating more and eating based on what I craved and learning how to read that and learning that cravings aren't bad and my body's always trying to tell me something, et cetera, et cetera. But then now, instead of eating the food from this mindset of, okay, this food's going to make me better, this food's going to bring my period back, it was like, oh man, this food tastes good. This food was fun to make. I know I still am very focused on buying locally. So going to farmer's market and intentionally choosing the food and the ingredients, and then coming home and having so much fun being creative in the kitchen and making the food, where for so long it had been like, okay, here's my protein, here's my carb, here's my fat, kind of piecemealing. And then it was like, okay, well, this has these vitamins, this has this minerals. I'm eating this for nutrient density only. So it was like weighing and measuring, macronutrient only, and then micronutrient only. And then finally got to the point where I was like, oh, food is a love language. I can love on myself with this food, and it's going to serve me on calorie needs. It's going to serve me on micronutrient needs, but it's also going to serve me emotionally. And I think it's important that we don't always think of emotional eating as a bad thing. It's okay to eat with emotion. It's okay to love ourselves with food. It's also okay to eat things because we feel crappy. So kind of coming full circle with that, instead of controlling food as a way to work through stress, loving on myself more with food. So the mindset while I ate, because there's a whole psychology of eating that's very important. And the same thing with fitness. I kind of got into this place where I was like, oh, CrossFit's scary. I can't do any intensity. All I'm going to do is walk. And then I'd go on these walks and be like, I'm just walking because that's what's best. And instead it was like, no, I'm going to wake up this morning. I'm going to do a bit of a body scan. I'm going to decipher what will feel good for me today. And it kind of turned into like 2 to 3 times a week I would do CrossFit at whatever pace and intensity level felt good to me that day. Sometimes I pushed really hard and it felt great. Other days I kind of pulled back a little bit. And then the other days I'd get out in nature and I would walk. I would hang from trees and just kind of like feeling it out. And some days I just sat around and worked and like did some flow, maybe some squats, and just tuned in. And so those two things definitely shifted, but they shifted from a space of mindfulness. And so I think it really does come back to just like being in tune with my body and serving myself through these things. And then just not being so stressed all the time and taking pauses. I think one of the things that I really lacked was ever taking a break. And I think it's because I knew that if I pause, I might be so exhausted that I can't train for 3 hours the next day, or I might realize that there's deeper lying issues that I need to address. So finally pausing, letting myself cry, being okay with crying, being okay with getting sick. Because I think once I did start to pause, that winter, I got sick more times than I had in the years prior. And I think it's because I finally gave my body space to get sick, which is a weird kind of like backwards thing where sometimes our bodies need to get sick. Sometimes our bodies, like, we need to cry. Sometimes we need to feel the tough stuff in order to just work through things. And our bodies are such a physical manifestation of the way that we feel. So I usually get sick when I'm really, really stressed. I'll get a cold like I do right now, or I will, that kind of thing. And so just being okay with feeling things, feelings, huge. Allowing my body to take time to pause. And if that means I get sick, if that means I need to take a couple days off of work, if that means whatever that means for me, accepting that and being okay with it.
Well, I'm having a thought. So you tell me if this resonates with you. It sounds like you started having a conversation with your body, meaning like you would allow it to talk from time to time. Whereas before it was just, you're just going to do and do and do and do and do and do. And it doesn't really matter what your body has to say, because you're just going to do and perform and then do some more and perform some more. But it sounds like you, in terms of the fitness, you got to the point where you were in conversation with your body. Like, what feels good today? Mm-hmm. Do I feel like pushing myself today? Do I feel like taking it easy today? And possibly releasing, because I also had this sense of like, there's a ton of fear. I mean, you're only going to do that every single day without stop relentlessly, because there's a fear of what's going to happen if you stop. So it sounds like there must have been a bit of working on releasing whatever. I don't know if that's even on. You'd have to tell me if that's a right assessment. And then if it is, then what the fear was about. Like, if I stop, will I never continue? If I stop, will I get sick? If I stop, am I going to gain weight? Like, if I stop, I don't know what the fear is, but it sounds as though there was fear. And similarly with food, just allowing yourself to have that conversation. Like, what do I actually like? What do I actually want to eat? Can I enjoy this? Is it okay to allow myself to enjoy the food? So does that resonate with you? It's because that's kind of what I was hearing, or at least what kind of the emotions that came up for me when you were sharing what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like it's kind of a combination of a lot of those things. I mean, I never had a chance to get to know my body. I never had a chance to experience the full rush of all the hormones, because I don't think I ever had like a cycle that really encompassed all of the hormones and all, a full regular cycle. And so potentially, I think, on a biological level, I had never gone through that. And maybe when my 20 somethings, I was a little scared of what that would be like, maybe even on a subconscious level. There's also a fear of my body changing for sure. There was a fear of losing the identity of an athlete. I think that was a big one too. Since sophomore year of high school, I have always identified in some way as an athlete competing for something, whether that was, my really intense field hockey. I played club, I played year round, and then it went into running and endurance training in college. And then it went straight into CrossFit, and I was trying to do like local competitions and never really thriving in that because I was just breaking my body down. I couldn't move heavy loads because I had been a vegetarian endurance athlete for so long that my body didn't know what to do with these heavy weights. And so I've learned I think those are the two things. Like, I had a fear of losing my identity as an athlete, and I had a fear of what my body and mind might do given the opportunity, because I'd been in control for so long. So there's maybe a fear of meeting me and who am I actually? And come to find out, I really, really love myself.
That's really deep. That's really,
yeah.
Well, and I'm asking all these questions because I'm really thinking about, this is super common. Your story, it's not, like every woman doesn't experience this, but it's not an uncommon story. And
Right.
that. And so there's women who are specifically chose this episode. We're recording it, so I haven't titled it yet, but there's women who were searching and specifically looked for this episode, right? Because it's them. And there's a lot of women who are listening right now who are like, yes, that's me. I have always been an athlete, and I'm just not sure how I can ever let that go, or do I have to let it go? Or is there a way for me to, find a balance and still do my thing when it comes to fitness, but do it in a way that is supportive of my body, or at least, find a way to get into that communication with my body and not just go and go and go and go and go until your body falls apart. So maybe tell us a little bit then about how your experience has filtered into what you do now, and tell us a little bit about your Intuitively You program. Before we started recording, you were talking just about how a big part of this journey for you was actually connecting with your body and listening to it. And it's just really interesting for me to sit and listen to your experience, because it just really feels like it took a long time, but this whole process, all of these years, really just brought you to the point that you could just hang out with yourself, learn what your body needs, and really just kind of be more comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, I just, if I could help one woman even kind of get to a place of beginning the process to be a little bit more intuitive in eating and in fitness and developing a mindset practice, then I feel like I've won in some capacity this like lifelong journey of, and I went through some stuff, and because of where I came on the other side of it, I'm so grateful. But I know that it wasn't easy, and I had to get help. I had to seek out help, and I had to learn that it was this trifecta and not just a one type of fix, a single fix basically. And so what I've done with my work I have kind of two facets here. I've got, a few. I have the Modern Mamas podcast, which has been an incredible experience for me. My friend Jess and I started it when I was like in the third trimester of pregnancy. And I truly believe it has been incredibly impactful in my motherhood transition. It's us sharing a lot, but it's also us building a community and getting to interview all of these experts, yourself included, that have brought so much insight and wisdom and love into my life. And then I also think if I had started this podcast 4 years ago, I would have been in a place where getting all of this wisdom and insight from all these professionals would have spiraled me into like this need for perfectionism, which that kind of just occurred to me right now. So definitely the podcast came at the right time. The universe knew that it was time, and the community that we built. So my husband and I and our daughter actually moved into a van, and we leave in a couple of weeks to travel the country. And the beautiful thing about this, one of the beautiful things about the podcast is that we have, in every state we're visiting, I have a listener who's reached out and been like, hey, we have a driveway or we have acreage, you can come and park, and we'd love for our daughters to meet or our kids to meet. And so it's been so beautiful. And then also knowing, based on all of the feedback we've gotten, that we are, through our work, impacting so many moms and helping women in the motherhood transition, prenatally, postpartum, preconception, dealing with infertility, feel like they're not alone, or know they're not alone. Have the opportunity to connect with so many other like-minded women because of the podcast and because of the topics we cover and the questions we answer. And then Facebook group. just seeing women connect there, and people have made friends and met in person. And it's been beautiful because I really feel like through this journey, whether it's infertility, preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, motherhood, it's so easy to feel isolated and to feel alone and to feel like you're the only one going through the thing. But ultimately, we're all in this together. So the podcast has been amazing. And then I'm just getting the ball rolling with the Mama Mentality, which is the component of my business where I work with moms. I used to do nutrition consulting and programming for anyone. And I've learned that my heart is in this journey, anywhere in it. So again, like infertility, preconception, pregnancy, postpartum, motherhood, anywhere in there, anyone who identifies in any way as a mom, or with a desire to be a mom, or any of it. And every single consultation that I do includes discussion on fitness, nutrition, and mindset, all under this umbrella of coming from a place of self-care versus self-loathing, which sometimes it is, or the desire to change, or feeling imperfect, or being at odds with your body. It comes from a place of let's shift. The first conversation is always shifting the script a little bit about how we talk about ourselves, about the journey that we're on, about meeting ourselves where we are now. And then I really feel like every journey needs discussion on nutrition, needs discussion on daily movement, and needs discussion on the mindset piece. So I do one-on-one consulting there. I actually just launched a 6-week postpartum programming that offers a workout. Each workout is offered for just body weight, for minimal equipment like dumbbells and kettlebells, and then for a full gym setup. And that's 6 weeks, which ultimately could be 18. Because if you go through the first round of it, just body weight, and then you can scale up to minimal equipment, and then you can scale up to full gym setup, which I love. And then I just launched a program called Intuitively You. And it's an online course that I created with my friend Kelsey. We both had very similar journeys, and it dives into 4 modules of mindset, nutrition, fitness, and then self-love, and takes you through there's video, there's worksheets, there's PowerPoint, and there's activities to do on your own. And it's completely self-paced. And then you also have access to our Facebook group for that. And you have access to it for a lifetime. So you can always come back to it. So those are the things that through my journey, I've put into the world that I'm just so passionate about. And it's really been such a journey. And I'm so grateful to have the space to share and to have connected with so many incredible women. And it's crazy to think how I got here, but the journey is I'm still in the midst of it, right? There's still a lot of growth to be had and a lot to learn and a lot of connection to be made. And so I'm just grateful to be where I am now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, thank you for sharing all the different things that you're doing. And, if we've covered a lot of ground today, we certainly have delved deeply into your story and how connecting with your body and your intuition has made a huge impact in your life, obviously changed everything. So, what would be, if there was anything that the listeners could take from today's episode, what would be the kind of biggest thing or the one thing you'd want them to leave with?
I think that for me, the main takeaway would just be that our bodies are capable, they're wise, and they are beautiful. And all that they need is for us to kind of open the door to be well and to have that, like you said, that conversation with our bodies and kind of shifting our headspace from being at odds, trying to change, feeling unworthy to my body is great how it is now. And I don't have issues with anyone wanting to change the way they look in any capacity. Like you want to lose a little bit of weight, but it's coming from a place of meeting yourself where you are and still loving yourself where you are now. That's great. That's fine. But just it's coming at whatever we want to do in life and however we want to live from a place of loving and cherishing who we are now and our bodies now, and keeping that mindset moving forward and coming at whatever decisions we make in life from a place of self-care and self-love and speaking our own love language. And obviously still need to be like kind of not hard on ourselves, but hold ourselves accountable. That's important too. But from a place, again, of knowing what we're capable of versus feeling like we're not worthy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I couldn't think of better words to end on. Laura,
thank
you for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's such a treat. I'm so grateful. And I know we had to reschedule a couple times, but I'm so happy that we were able to do this. And I'm really grateful to have gotten to meet you. And I hope we can meet in person at some point.
Yes, I know, because you're traveling around, so you never know. You might end up on my driveway. You just never know.
Yes, that would be fun.
Well, so the listeners can find you. You're at the Modern Mamas podcast. So whatever your podcast app of choice, you can do a quick search for that. And the main website that the listeners can go to find you?
myradicalroots.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. We will put the links in the show notes, and I'll also throw in the link to the episode that we did together that I did on your podcast. So that'll be fun for listeners to check out as well. So thanks again. This was a great chat.
So fun. Enjoy your day and your week, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/270. I hope that you enjoyed this episode with Laura. It was a treat to have an opportunity to chat with her. And I feel this conversation that we had and Laura sharing her experience was really important because I know that there's so many women out there that have experienced similar things, especially as it relates to their menstrual cycle. Inadvertently, in a number of episodes, either previously and episodes coming up, this is a theme, the theme of over-exercise, under-nutrition, losing the cycle for a period of time, and then really having to get back into a conversation with your body to bring the cycle back and to really kind of bring your body back into balance. This is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about the work that I do, because my work is focused and centered on the menstrual cycle. There's lots of different fields, lots of different areas when it comes to health, but when you're looking at the menstrual cycle, it's just a different outlook, a different way of looking at it. From this perspective, you can't ignore when the period goes away, and you know that it means something. It means something very important about a woman's overall health. And so when you know the specific areas to look at and to watch in order to just to support your body to bring your cycle back and to bring yourself back into health, it always strikes me how it always takes us back to the basics. I always find it very interesting, especially when I'm working with women one-on-one who've lost their cycles. Often no one, in their lives are going to all these doctors and they're being told to go on the pill and all these things are happening. But it's like no one is asking the basic questions like, are you getting enough to eat? How much are you exercising? Are you getting enough sleep? I find that when you focus on the menstrual cycle and you focus on what's happening in a woman's health related to her cycle, it just helps us to get back to basics, because ultimately as women, we often forget to take care of ourselves. And we often just are so focused on all these other things that we literally forget to feed ourselves enough. We forget to get enough rest, and we just forget to really engage in a conversation with your body. So in many ways, when I was, having this conversation with Laura, it occurred to me that while her period was gone, there was this one-sided conversation going on. She's doing all this exercise, all this stuff, and not really paying attention to let her body speak. I always say, your body can't speak to you with words. And so if you want to tune into your body's half of the conversation, you have to start looking at things like your menstrual cycle. You have to start paying attention to how you're feeling, the basic cues, hunger cues, tired cues, all the cues, stress cues, the different ways that your body speaks to you that can often be very subtle. One of the things I find with charting is that just by paying attention to the subtle aspects that are happening in your menstrual cycle, it kind of attunes you to start to actually pay attention to your body. You start asking yourselves questions like, well, I notice that I get headaches sometimes, and then you start paying attention to your cycle. When does it happen in my cycle? Or if you notice that you feel really tired sometimes, like what time of the day do you typically feel tired? Or what time of your cycle do you typically feel more like that? And it allows you to really just get into that conversation with your body. And so for anyone who's listening who can relate to Laura's story in one way or the other, I would encourage you to take this as an opportunity just to start tuning in to your body. And instead of having a one-sided conversation where you're kind of doing all the things and ignoring all the signs that your body's trying to send to you, take a minute, let your body speak. I guess I could rephrase that, because your body's always speaking to you in different ways, but perhaps just open your heart and also just your senses to what's happening and the cues that your body is trying to send to you. And of course, another important theme that came up was the concept of how we view the women's body in our culture. How when we look at images in the media and just, in general, the images are often of very skinny bodies. Women of color aren't often represented. In many ways, this lack of body diversity sets us up to be more likely to experience issues like this, because often at the root of this pattern of over-exercise and undernutrition is a very strong desire to maintain, to either gain and or maintain a very skinny, small body. That's just something that we can't ignore when talking about this issue, because ultimately there's a reason why, we're feeling driven to go this route. And without actually looking at that and addressing it and thinking about the messages that we hear about body size and what, beautiful, quote unquote, healthy body looks like, it's so ironic. There's many cases where women have these bodies that are quote unquote perfect, very lean, very muscular, looking like a cover of a magazine. And we don't know if these women are actually menstruating. We don't know if these women are actually healthy. And so it's very interesting. And I encourage you to just kind of think about that for a while, because often these images that we're seeing, that we're celebrating in the media, we don't even know if these women are menstruating or having periods or healthy. When you're not menstruating, you're rapidly losing bone mass and, at an increased risk of developing osteoporosis earlier in life. And so what we think of as beautiful and what we're kind of working towards, these goals of having these perfectly defined, very skinny, very muscular bodies in many cases, not in all cases. Again, the menstrual cycle is the great equalizer. So if you are, really if you're in that world and you're sculpting your body and your cycles are regular and healthy because you're making sure that you're taking enough time to rest and ensuring that you're consuming enough calories to offset the energy expenditure, then wonderful. I'm extremely happy for you. Again, if the menstrual cycle is not coming at all or not regular, or the second phase of the cycle is way too short, then it's time to start tuning into those cues. And so that is, I'll leave it there with my commentary on this episode. But I just really felt compelled to share a few thoughts, especially because, as you'll notice, this is a topic that it's been coming up a lot more on the podcast. And it's interesting because I didn't plan it that way, but you'll see in the episodes that are coming up in the month of August, I have a few on-air client sessions that are coming up in either towards the end of August or beginning of September this year. And you'll just notice the theme just keeps coming up, and it wasn't intentional. It just kind of happened that way. So this is an interesting kind of little period of time in the podcast where, here and there, we're just kind of focusing on this issue. And it's really coming to my attention how very prevalent and common that it is. So yes. So I just want to thank you once again for tuning into the show, for spending some time with me today. I appreciate all of you for supporting the show, for helping to spread the word, for taking your friends on social when you see episodes that you know that they would appreciate. If you know somebody who would appreciate today's episode, feel free to share the link, which is fertilityfriday.com/270. And I hope that you are enjoying your week or weekend. Whenever you are listening to this episode, I hope that you are enjoying your summer. I hope that you're enjoying some sunshine and some fun and potentially a bit of a vacation or even a break from work. And so with that, I will say thank you and let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.